Well, good evening everyone and welcome to the Scottish Parliament. I'm Elaine Smith, MSP, and as a Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm delighted to be your host for this evening's discussion on the future of the music industry. And we're also very pleased to have been working in partnership with Wide Days in the organisation of this event. To discuss the issues this evening, I'm joined by a very distinguished panel, and I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. But our panel were quite keen to know what the makeup of the audience this evening is. So if anyone in the audience is a musician, could you indicate by raising your hand? Excellent, thank you. Any promoters? No. Two. Promoters, labels? Managers? And others that have just dropped in to see the event? Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to start on my left to introduce you to our panel. We have Scott Cohen, who began his career in the music business in the late 80s as an artist manager of both independent and major label artists. He co-founded Orchard Enterprises in 1997 and he built it into the largest distributor of digital music with operations in 25 countries and HQs in New York and London. Could you join me in welcoming Scott this evening? Next to Scott Cohen, we have Scott Hutchinson, who started playing solo shows under the name Frightened Rabbit in 2003. By 2006, the band was a three-piece and they recorded their debut LP, Sing the Greys. The band is currently a five-piece and has to date released 3 studio albums. They've got a large following outside of Scotland, touring the UK, Ireland and America. Welcome, Scott. Next to Scott, we have Caroline Gorman, who's worked at various record labels and is now the head of Rage Music, a team of musicians who compose and produce music for films, TV, advertisements, radio and artists. And they've worked with bands as diverse as Snow Patrol, Simple Minds, Mogwai and Milo, and they've won 3 BAFTA awards and an Ivor Novello nomination. Welcome, Caroline. Next to Caroline, we have Olaf Furness, who is a journalist, event organiser and tour guide. In 2004, he co-founded Born to be Wide, a regular night aimed at bringing together those in music and the arts. In April 2010, Olaf and his colleagues hosted Wide Days, which featured a variety of panels, including music management and how to get on to a festival bill. Welcome, Olaf. Inger Dirdal is next to Olaf, and Inger is the Managing Director of Music Export Norway. The company was established by the Norwegian music industry to provide a service and resource centre for exporters of Norwegian music in all genres and formats. They provide access to information on Norwegian artists and companies, and they also provide artists with travel support to the most important international showcase arenas. Welcome, Inger. And last but not least, our final panellist is John Preston, who has over 25 years' experience in the music industry, starting with Bruce's Record Shops here in Scotland, some of us will remember. His career in London was with EMI, Universal and laterally BMG, now Sony, where he was chairman for 10 years. He was also chairman of the British phonographic industry and he's now a director of the Queen's Hall and involved in other charities. Welcome, John. I'm going to take a minute or two just to set the scene for before we get into our discussion this evening. And in 2012, Creative Scotland and Scottish Enterprise commissioned an economic contribution study of the arts and creative industries in Scotland. And for the first time, that study split out the music, visual and performing arts sectors. The report used Scottish statistics from 2010 to estimate the contribution to Scotland's economy at £3.2 billion. Of that, the music industry contributed £10 million, with 400 people employed across Scotland. However, the authors of that study don't believe that this new categorisation shows the full impact of the industry on Scotland's economy or job numbers. In addition, music recording, publishing and performer representation are very much London concentrated. So the authors do not believe it possible to gauge the full extent of the contribution to the music industry makes to the Scottish economy. Not only does music contribute to our economy, but some would argue that it forms the basis of our culture. So tonight, we hope to discuss what are the issues facing the music industry today in Scotland, both nationally and internationally. I'm going to allow an opportunity a bit later on for members of the audience to put questions and views to the panel later in the session. So if you want to note that while we're during our discussions, then I'll come to the audience a bit later on. But to get us started, I'm going to give each of our panellists a few minutes to outline what they see as being the key issues for the music industry today. And I'm going to start in the order that we introduced our panellists with. Scott Cohen. Scott.
Well, I don't know. When I think about the music industry and we think about the issues, I always like to look outside of the industry from a different perspective. I think too many people look at it as what are the problems for artists or managers or labels or promoters. And I think when you do that, sometimes you miss the crux of the real problems or issues. I mean, how do I put it? If I think of the music industry from an outsider's perspective, you know, what are the consumer problems we're solving? Or what are the business opportunities? Meaning, if you go back to a period in the late 1800s and radio was invented, you know, so all of a sudden you could listen to events without actually being present. And ultimately, when you got around the same time recording devices, you could then choose what you wanted to hear when you wanted to hear it. I mean, we were solving consumer problems. Even though consumers didn't know they had a problem, you could now listen to music without actually being at a live event. And if you keep going through the 20th century and you look at things like cassettes or CDs, these were all solving problems. How do you take your music collection and make it portable? How do you bring it with you? And I think now we're in the 21st century. Instead of looking at how we save what we've already built, we should say, what are the issues surrounding consumers or fans of music? I don't think they have any problem getting music free or cheap. I don't think that that's the problem that needs to be solved. So I think we should look at what do we need to fix, because we don't need to fix the record business. We need to fix consumer problems.
Thank you very much. Scott Hutchinson.
I think, sort of from my perspective, I'm not going to do much complaining about things, because I think a lot of power is now in bands' hands to get their music heard. Now, that's the initial stage, but I do believe as well that whilst people who traditionally were making money selling music, that's not even really relevant for bands anymore. As selling music is, to me, kind of, not almost like an advert for your live show, and then that's where you make income, and then selling your music, of course, to television and film is a really lucrative, or can be a really lucrative sort of avenue. But really, from the band's perspective, I don't think it's been healthier or weighing so much in our favour for a little while. So I'm quite happy.
Thanks very much, Scott. Caroline, a few words to set the scene.
From a business perspective, I think the future of the music industry as it affects kind of film and TV people like me is twofold. Number one, we are finding budgets getting crushed immensely. Nothing as, even in the past 5 years since I've been working in the kind of industry sector that I'm in now, there's been massive change. But in a way, that's good, because it really forces and challenges people to find better ways of doing things and cheaper ways and more efficient ways, and that can only ever be a good thing. And also, it's really kind of forced people like me to go and actively look for younger talent and where we can kind of nurture people and bring them into things, which is always a good thing, but it's kind of been forced out of something potentially bad or maybe not the best. And for us, I think that's an exciting future, but is also a little bit tricky, because it's not hugely affluent, and it really kind of bores down that a lot of it is going to be hard work and hard slog. But I think if you're in this industry, you have to be prepared for that, because that's unfortunately, no matter which facet of the industry you're in, it is hard work and hand slog, and it's certainly not glamorous. So
Thank you very much, Caroline. Olaf?
Well, I think it's good to go rewind a little bit and rewind to the days when John was still running BMG, and I kind of I started out as a journalist round about then, and I can still remember some of the real excesses at the record companies and the kind of parties that were thrown. It was quite extreme, and
I'm 22 years old.
and I think what's interesting how it's developed since then is that you can put your own music out really easily. You just have to go to a service that will put it into all the different online retailers. You can record your music for far less money, and you can get access to the gatekeepers in a way that you couldn't before. A conference like in the city in Manchester, when it was going, cost hundreds of pounds to attend. Nowadays, it's something like £30 to come to one of our events. To Y Days is free to go north and Inverness, and you can meet all sorts of people that might be interested in using your music. So there's been a big leveler, but that's not to say that you still don't need people that have expertise in certain areas. I mean, Caroline knows who to go to in television or ad agencies to get your music used there. But I think it is interesting in terms of the actual barriers to getting your music out. That's changed, and I think you'll see areas where maybe other industries start to become keener to work with music as well. So that might pick up some of the slack. So, for example, if you have a big festival, there might be tourist attractions or something in the area that will want to work with the music festival.
Thanks very much, Olaf. Inga, maybe you could tell us a bit about the situation in Norway?
In Norway, we started off the Music Export Office 12 years ago, and one of our main things were Norway is a small territory. It's not only in the far corner, we've chosen to be outside EU, and we have a lot of things against us. So we needed to try to get the music heard out there. But one thing that's helped us, that is now and the future, is the digital world, because the music is accessible from all over the place, but we still have to market it. And what we're trying to help the music industry in Norway is to find new income streams. It was mentioned here, live music is very important, but the more live gigs there is on, the more competition there is in live music as well. So it's for everybody that want to make a livelihood of being creative or working in the industry. They just need to find money so they can make a business out of it.
Thanks very much, Inga. And John?
Well, sadly, I'm not going to provide a huge confrontation at this point, because I actually agree that when you get a major shift, as has taken place in the last 10 years in an industry where the digital world has come upon the industry has made loads of mistakes in addressing that, and in so doing has created a lot of opportunities for probably most of the people in this room. That's the fact, that when you get the disintegration of the old system, then opportunity arises for everybody. But you do have to think of it as holistic. It's no longer just the recording industry from which you're going to be able to make your money. Now, there is a trap in that, which is that it was the recording industry that provided most of the money, the seed money that created the industry as we remember it. And there is a disconnect at the moment between where the money is and getting it to the people who have not yet got it, who I suspect are quite a lot of people in the room, possibly. And that disconnect, there are various ways where that's developing in the digital world with cloud financing and so on and so forth. But the problem there is that the financing is still disconnected from the expertise. And what we've heard already is that you need help, you need expertise and contacts and guidance on how to get out there, get your music out there, and make it the music that people want, as opposed to just being another commodity that's out there in an undifferentiated mass. But I think there's loads of opportunity.
Thanks very much, John. I'm going to have a bit of discussion, hopefully, with the panel, and everybody seems to be agreeing at the moment. Maybe we can get some disagreement. Scott?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, the thing about it, when you talk about the great leveling, and it doesn't really change anything. You know, it's not easier or harder. Last time I checked the charts, there was still just number one every week. And I don't think that can ever change. There's one number one. And what's changed is how you reach your audience, how you make your money, but it doesn't mean because everyone can make music that all of a sudden there's going to be more number ones. There's only one. But I think the big change is that the music industry was very binary in that you either succeeded or you failed. And now I actually think there's a middle class that's emerging where you can actually have a career without ever having a top 10 single, without having any kind of great commercial success. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities that's never discussed, that you can actually create music, stay in this industry without having, you know, top hits.
But can you have that career in Scotland? Do you need to move away from Scotland? What are the panel's thoughts on that?
I guess, I mean,
Scott?
I'm probably in the middle class, and I've lived in Scotland all my life, so you don't have to leave. You probably have to get a train down to London occasionally to shake some hands and have some dinners and that. But I think you know, we are really lucky. Speaking just from my perspective of before our band, there was, you know, there's a really rich history of Scottish, especially indie music, being more relevant to the path that's been essentially forged for bands like Frightened Rabbit and, you know, our kind of contemporaries by Teenage Fan Club, Belle and Sebastian, and Mogwai, and across the globe. And so there's that weight is with us. So for us to kind of get ourselves heard has almost been a lot easier as a result, you know. But yeah, no, you don't have to leave Scotland ever.
In fact, you don't even have to leave your own bedroom really now, do you?
No.
So why do people need support? John mentioned that you still need support. Caroline?
I was going to say it's not so much the support. It is the train down to London or elsewhere, but usually London, for the dinners and the handshaking and the still putting a face to the name that you're dealing with consistently. And if you're choosing to be based in Scotland, against everything that's probably ever been told to you about this industry, it can be done, but you do have to have it in your head that there's still vast areas of this industry that are very London-centric, and TV and film is very much one of those. So if you're choosing to be sitting up in a studio in Glasgow, you need to do that knowing that you'll have to have a counterpart studio in London that you will have to go to, or if you're going to do recording for a certain level, you might have to do that in London because we just don't have the same facilities up here for us to do that. And you kind of do it as a love-hate relationship with London because of those things. But as long as you have the right attitude, saying, well, yeah, I'm doing the right thing, I'm choosing to stay here, and I want to use musicians that are here, and I want to do as much as I can here, but for the betterment of my business or my band, I know part of that might necessitate me travelling to London or doing some business in London or even out to LA for film stuff. It's just the way, unfortunately, that sector of the industry is still in those places.
Well, you probably have to travel wherever you are if you're in a small country. I mean, Norway's a good example of this. They've got this black metal scene that's really celebrated, and a lot of those guys are signed to labels in Germany because there's just the critical mass. Germany is a big enough country to sustain a career. So even if you're not living there, you'll have representation there, and you'll probably be playing specialist festivals that can exist because there's enough Germans or people round about Germany that are buying tickets for that, whereas they probably would struggle just to survive in Norway alone. And I think you see that with most smaller countries. That's why the Scandinavians in particular have been really, really good at seeing what's happening there and really pushing their music abroad, because they don't look at it as one market in their own country. They look at it as a global market. That's why, I mean, Iceland's even more incredible population of, what, 300,000, and you see Icelandic bands on tour and cropping up all over the place.
Thank you.
There's been a very political decision from the government in Norway, and the government that's in now for the second term, 7 years they've been in, their aim is that 1% of the gross national budget should be for the culture. And it's not only because culture is important, that they think, but it's work. And even if you don't bring the big money back to Norway for music, it creates jobs. And in music or other creative things, you can compete. You can't compete about making cheap T-shirts for China, but you can compete when it comes to culture product if you use it in that respect. And I think that in that respect also Scotland is about the same size as Norway. Of course, Scotland is a part of UK, but Norway is an independent country. So we have to make sure that we build up an industry in Norway. We don't want everybody just leave Norway and move to the US or the UK. They can spend periods there. We say most contracts on Norwegian hands and together license out to the best in the world to work in the music, because that will bring ways of getting new music out, because there is the network and the people in Norway, they know how to do it. But if you send an artist on its own to London, the next artist have to find new people in London. But if you have that basic industry in Norway, it will help the music to move out.
I mean, obviously we do have devolution, so do the panel think that there are ways that we can learn from Norway maybe to take some of this forward?
Well, I've got experience putting on Scottish bands abroad, and the problem we have in Scotland is there's, in the biggest part of Scotland, the Central Belt, which is covered by Scottish enterprise, there's still no recognition of the role that music can play, which is in contrast to Highlands and Islands enterprise, where they see it as a small area and see this as a really important dynamo for the economy. So you've seen, therefore, all these festivals rise up, especially in the Highlands. There's been, in parallel with events like Go North, helping musicians and now helping the creative industries. And I think that that's something that I've seen certain developments with devolution. I mean, on an artistic level, just more and more musicians in Scotland singing in their own accents rather than putting on some daft American accent or a Mockney accent or something like that. But in terms of the industry, I think that there maybe needs to be more recognition of it as something like Inga says, as an actual cultural product rather than, you know, something that you just go and listen to when you fancy a bit of diversion.
I think that's so important. You know, you don't want to get into a world where it becomes commoditized, where it's a race to the bottom to see who can make a cheaper product, and you lose. When you get into things that are cultural-based, intellectual property, songs, and those things, those are so valuable that if you lose them, then it's almost impossible to get it back. And to hold on to what you have here and create an industry where people form an opinion of what Scotland is based on your music, your films, your literature, the things that people can't copy, it's you. And too often, governments don't support those. Those are the things that are so easily clipped off because they'd rather, you know, have another manufacturing plant where they can, you know, put some people on an assembly line, and quickly you see how they go away, and then you're left with nothing. And so,
yeah, it's like important to remember that, and you know, if initiatives are being, you know, made, then I think I've found, and certainly a bunch of people I know have found, that our Scottishness is just such a huge part of what people love about what we're doing. Of course, you can't just write a crap song and sing it in your own accent and expect people to like it, but It depends what you think of my band, I suppose. But like, you know, it's been a huge part in opening doors for us abroad. Definitely is the identity that we have, and like I said before, you know, through a sort of rich history, and that can't be ignored. It's got to be used.
We've got huge advantages. We sing in the language of international culture, but we have a culture that's identifiably our own, with a fantastic history and tradition, with huge international success already happened for Scottish artists over the last 50 years and more. But the international success in the last 50 years, there are lots of artists that we all know about who've done fantastically well. So we've got the tradition, we've got the language. We could do with more government support. And the problem actually is that from a government point of view, is that governments think that we're always asking for money. But it isn't money. It's things like licensing laws, health and safety. It's like insurance requirements for gigs, for you being able to use premises, which are local authority premises, out of their normal use, where we could get more gigs going on. It's about encouraging an environment where music can thrive because of government support. Instead of addressing it as, oh, there's a series of laws which cover these things, is looking at saying, how do we encourage music, and look at the laws which do affect that, which are many times are just the licensing laws where how do kids who are under 18 go to a place where they can be safe and see a gig without having to think about a promoter having to go through hoops to be able to set that up, or health and safety where you can't get a number of people into a place because you've got to have X number of security people and people can't afford the security people. The insurance, etc. Those things really matter. Those are things that government can do which don't necessarily cost money in terms of just put the money down and turn away. And the other problem is that in these times, you notice how quickly you go from governments who talk about creative industries and how up they are for it and how they want to encourage them. It's only in the good times that they say that. When the excrement gets in the fan, it's suddenly back to manufacturing, back to engineering, back to the old kind of historic industries. Now, we're not going to recover our historic manufacturing base just by an effort of will. And what we're already good at is the creative stuff. And it's about reinforcing what we're good at and making it easy to do. And that finally, in relation to the opportunity, is we also happen to have a world-leading export business 400 miles away. I mean, the best in the world, actually, after America, which happens to be 5 times the size of the UK market. But actually, the UK industry was phenomenally good. And they've never discriminated against the Scots in terms of finding artists and therefore helping Scots artists to reach an international market. It's all there. It's just a question of recognising it and seeing the opportunity. And the opportunity in devolution is that we can persuade the government maybe to do some more things which would actually help the environment in which music can thrive.
Olaf, is that done more in the north? You talked about the difference between the Highlands and Islands and the Central Belt.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think if you break it down to one person, there's a guy called Robert Hicks that now manages an artist called Rachel Samani and still runs the Lupaloo Festival in Ullapool. But he was helped by Highlands and Islands Enterprise, not to the tune of thousands and thousands of pounds, but just if he was putting on a gig in Ullapool, maybe a little bit towards the PA hire, he was brought in to go north to book the artists for that. And he used that springboard to co-found Rock Ness. He became the booker for Belladrum, and that's when Belladrum started selling out. And you see the expertise and the knowledge that that's created, not just with Robert, but the whole team around him. All of them work in the creative sector, and most of them work in music. And so you have very identifiable examples of someone that what a little bit of money can actually do, and it doesn't involve filling in lots of forms. It's just someone that has the sense to see those opportunities. And I think that having something where you're able to react quickly or respond quickly, that's something that's really necessary among government agencies, because very often it's a very slow process. I mean, even Creative Scotland, it takes 3 months to get a reply to your grant application. So you know, in that time, someone could have been offered a slot at a huge event in the States, and the thing's already over by the time they get a reply. And that's one of the problems with the music business that I recognise. It's very fast. Bands get booked in a matter of weeks for some big events. But I think the point John makes is really good for, especially for under 18s. When I was 15, I was lucky enough to look 18 and I'd just go and see whatever I wanted. But I was also lucky enough to live at a time when most touring bands were playing the Playhouse before they started stuffing these horrible musicals in there instead. And so you could go and see pretty much any touring band. And I think that my younger sister, she was denied that. So even though she wanted to go and see a gig, she just couldn't get in. And it is really hard for promoters to do all ages shows. It involves a lot more hassle, and I think that's something that it's a really easy thing to address, because if you go to the Queen's Hall and you've spent £15 or £20 on a ticket for a gig, you're not going to be spending that whole time at the bar getting drunk. I mean, kids still find ways to get drunk. They're not, despite all the laws, it's not the same people that are going to go and see a band. And I'd really like to see that addressed, because I think a lot of people are really interested in music, but they're denied the opportunity to enjoy it.
So, I mean, just before I open this up to the audience, if we look at the Central Belt, you get to see in the park, but obviously that's quite pricey for a lot of people. So are you suggesting then that we have devolution of gigs like that out to maybe the towns where it's more reachable for younger people? There's somewhere like Coatbridge, for example, which has had brilliant musicians in the past, like the Silencers and Hue and Cry, show my age. But, you know, something like that, so that you have, I know, like, the local council do sort of Battle of the Bands type events, but do you see the way forward as more of that?
I'm not such a fan of Battle of the Bands, but I do think that, you know, touring bands, say, you know, Scott was playing a gig, it'd be a lot, you know, people want to see Frightened Rabbit, but in a lot of places, if you're under 18, you're not going to have that opportunity unless the band is really insistent. Biffy Clyro were one band that really always try to make their shows at least over 14s, but their manager had a hell of a job getting that through because of the bureaucracy that's involved and the loopholes that you have to, or not the loopholes, but the hurdles that you have to jump over. And I think that's something that really could be considered, and, you know, let people go to gigs if they want to go to gigs.
There's lots of wee places that don't think that they've got somewhere to put on a gig, but every wee place has got a school. You know, if the school could be used out of hours because the environment was created where there could be people to look after the place and make sure that people got in safely and went home safely, then every school in the land could be a gig.
Well, is that what people want? Sorry, Scott. I mean, do you want more gigs? Is that a problem that needs to be solved for people, or is it a problem that
I was just about to say that. We've got a lot of young people in the audience, and I think maybe this is a good point to turn to them and ask the audience whether they want to join in the discussion. If they do, then if you could raise your hand and keep it raised until a microphone comes to you or a red light goes on somewhere near to you, which means there's a microphone there. And if you could keep your questions and points quite brief, we'll try and get in as many as possible. So can I have an indication? Okay, young man in the second row.
Hi, I come from a small town called Hoyken on the Scottish borders, and to see a gig, I have to, a good gig, I have to travel at least an hour and a bit to get there. So I think there definitely should be more localised gigs with bigger bands.
Okay, more localised gigs. Scott, do you have a comment on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, having first-hand experience of this year going on tour throughout the kind of Highlands, Islands section of Scotland, the enthusiasm that it was met with was just ridiculously encouraging. I mean, you know, I think it's not a cost-effective thing to do. You don't actually, we ran it at a loss, because we really, really wanted to do it, which can be incredibly off-putting if you're not able to do that or you don't have tour support from somewhere or other. But again, that could be something that could be funded from elsewhere if it were, if it started to become more widespread. But yeah, I mean, localised gigs, I can't endorse them enough because
it is happening more as well. I mean, again, Robert Hicks has become a bit of an expert in this. That he's got people play. It's not so much relevant for the borders, but certainly in the Highlands and Islands, which is somewhere no one used to go to really to play. The Proclaimers did, and there were one or two notable exceptions, Echo and the Bunnymen as well, for those old enough to remember. But it's become a lot more common now, so I think hopefully there'll be more of that. Maybe someone in the borders will start putting on more shows.
Young man in the second row as well. You got a microphone?
Hi, I'm Kenneth from the Aberdeen City Youth Council, and we're blessed in Aberdeen with quite a lot of reasonably famous bands, but there's always a worry that all the city centre all the locations to go and see the bands are always in the city centre, and we've got quite a busy nightlife, and it's quite we say an unsafe city centre, but for young people it can be a worry for parents, and it can be a worry if you go and see them as well. So there's always a difficulty for these bands, I think, especially when most of the premises they're going to are licensed already. Whether it's licenses which allow them to be under 18s, do bands want underage drinkers there? Or even if there are overage, there are legal people who are drinking there. Is it safe for the younger people to be there? And also the getting home and getting there aspect is certainly a worry too. So that's probably something that I think needs to be targeted, is how it can be more approachable for young people without bands wanting to alienate the older crowds.
So living in the city doesn't necessarily make it more accessible? Caroline?
No, I'm just trying to think back to when I was underage, to be completely honest, which is a bit of a struggle. But kind of what Olaf said, it made me think, because I think without being mean, I am a little bit younger than yourself, but it was exactly the same. You went to whatever, and it was a gig. You weren't there to get drunk. People who are young and wanted to get drunk sat in the park. People who are young and want to go to gigs went to gigs. When I couldn't get into a gig, I ran a gig. That's the way I did it, and that's how I got into the garage for the first time, because I had a gig at Sleazy's that same night and then just trotted across. So I think people who want to see music will make the effort. They'll jump in the bus, they'll get in the subway, they'll go and see the gig. If there's a band coming they like, they're going to go, even if they have to travel for an hour. It's commitment, it's what you do. It's part and parcel of loving the band or following the band. So I don't think that the future of the industry is going to be solved by having lots of small local gigs where we have a party bus that is supervised by somebody's mum and dad and saying, right, all you under 14s, get in the party bus and we'll get you off home. But I don't think it's the future at all. I think that music and drinking is always going together. Music and drinking will always go together. Not so much even from the bigger festivals that are sponsored by drink brands. It's a way of people expressing themselves, and it's a cultural thing. It's how you enjoy yourself. It's a Scottish institution, music and drink together. Yeah. We're never going to change it. So I don't think that I can completely see the point of view with managers and bookers and promoters having a struggle and saying, look, this is too much hassle. And I think what John said earlier is a much better idea. Finding places like Film City in Govan or old town halls that you can take over and still be a cool looking venue that bands still want to come to, older people still want to come to, and young kids, the young people are still comfortable going to. And yeah, it can be licensed, or you can have a wristband on the night. I think it's something that has a mixture, because as a young person, that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to go where the bands were and where the old people were, because I felt like one of them. That's what I was aspiring to be. I would think I'd be shied away from a safe, school-based gig that was nicely packaged and too safe. I think that would be a complete turn-off, honestly, personally.
Can't they all just stay at home and watch it on YouTube, alone in their bedrooms?
I think, though, the safety thing's an interesting point. I just had a flashback. I think the most dangerous element of going to see gigs in the Playhouse were actually the bouncers, rather than anyone else in the audience. But it's now, if you've got a venue like the Picture House in Edinburgh, that is, they will have over 14s or over 16s shows. And I like it when there's a mixture in the audience. I mean, you get it, especially with some of the rock gigs, where you have really literally 3 generations of people in their teens right up to grandparents into the same music, and I think it makes for a nice atmosphere.
It's reassuring that young people go, oh my God, you don't just like what comes out of the X Factor, you actually hear seeing the music that I like too. It gives you a little bit of hope for the future generation in your heart, which I think is only a good thing.
There's a young woman at the front wanting to come in. Have the microphone.
Just from my experience and like where I stay, like there's been quite a lot of like sort of projects run where it's like bands will come in and play in community centres and stuff like that, and it's called like Sound Minds. It's meant to keep your mind healthy or something, I don't know. But to be honest, like if you have half the people that go to the gigs on Facebook, then you know fine well that before it, even though they can't access alcohol there because it's in a community centre, before it when they're getting ready they're accessing alcohol that way, so they're always going to be drinking because young people, that's all they're interested in right now. Like it is, like people keep on saying like, oh, we'll start a youth project for them or we'll start a youth club. Like children 14, 15, 16 and upwards don't want to go to a youth club, they don't want to be all safe and entertained, they want to break the rules because the rules are there, they want to rebel against them, they don't want to just sit in a community centre and dance like it's the YMCA or something. Like they don't. They want to go out and they want to try things that they're not supposed to, and that's what's happening anyway. Regardless of how much we try and make gigs that are accessible for them, they're going to try and outwith the things.
Do you want to defend the YMCA?
No, I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, it was funny. I went to see something on the Fringe last week, and I got this flashback to being 15 and going to see gigs in there, and it always seemed to be the night I wasn't there, there'd be a huge fight or some giant bust or something like that. But yeah, certainly I wasn't going there to do loads of drinking. I was going to check out bands predominantly, But at the same time, I wanted to be in a real gig environment and not so much in a community centre. I wanted to be somewhere where the adults were and the older musicians and things as well.
Doesn't the internet make it easier now to make fake IDs? You would think with Photoshop and, the danger. No, I'm not advocating it. But if you brought up drinking and rock and roll go together.
Well, I think we're getting it slightly bogged down in this part of the discussion. All I'm talking about is that government can have a role in making life easier for cultural people who are creative, getting their product out into the world. And if government just sat down and thought about it, they could make it easier to do that. I'm not talking about specific venues. I'm just talking about the possibility that it could happen in Hawick or wherever, not an hour away. It seems to me not sensible to set up barriers to people being able to access your product. You want to do it the other way up. And the reality is...
There's a really good point to be made here, actually, because I was at an event last year in Germany, and there was someone from Belgium, someone from Denmark, and I think maybe the Netherlands, and all of them have some kind of scheme whereby, in one way or another, the government supports music, so either some of the artist fee gets paid through a grant to the venue, or the venue gets some kind of tax break, but all of those were elements which allowed the promoters to be less dependent on alcohol sales, because I think a lot of places here they're really dependent on what they make over the bar, and I think that's a recognition in all of those countries that in fact music and culture is an important part of the overall social and economic fabric, and through that, through supporting that, then you actually create jobs, but you're also supporting culture at the same time.
We've got members of the Scottish Youth Parliament here, I know, so maybe this is something that they'll want to take away and lobby upon. I'm going to go to the gentleman at the back in the white shirt.
Hi there. Yeah, I find it interesting that we've got a representative from Norway here this evening who have been cited many times as Norwegians, similar to Scottish in as much they live in a country. There's 5 million, very independent, very well run, very good economic system. Looking at Norway's government's contribution to their own music scene, I mean, it seems to have grown incredibly in the past 10 years. Inga would know, but it might be something as much as doubled. And yet the actual industry, the music industry, has only grown by something like 4%. I mean, I'm only talking about the industrial side of it. I mean, the cultural side of it, whatever that might be. is beside the point in this respect. But just in that respect, though, just in the industrial respect, it seems like it's not not an effective way of actually growing an industry, throwing money at it from the government.
Inga, do you want to comment from Norway perspective?
In Norway, I don't think the industry will say that the government shouldn't be part of it, because it is. If you want to plan for the future and have people employed, you have to look at the whole society, of course. And as I said earlier, art or creative industries are growing industries, and you want to be ahead. So they put a lot of money into the industry or the music in Norway, and we have the schemes like you're talking about. You can apply from a small venue to put on concert with not underage, but under 18 in Norway. You can't drink before you're 18 in Norway, and things like that. It's encouraged, and a lot of encouragement in the to the people who want to work with music. And I can't see that there's not something negative. But at the end of the day, if you talk about being number one, as Scott said, it doesn't help. Government can't buy their way to make a number one hit worldwide. No, the reason why Norway put a lot of money into music is because they see it as a positive thing internally and externally. Because if you're known, even Olaf mentioned metal. I mean, if we are known in Italy as for metal, because people love metal, it's a positive thing. If it is jazz or if it is singer-songwriter, it's always, if people like the music, it creates a positive environment, impression. And that's what the government's responsibility, I think, to get. There's a lot of money put into education of musicians as well. And I remember when I first tried to start exporting music when I worked in label to UK, and it was quite daunting to come to UK and try to introduce the Norwegian bands or artists at that time, trying to get a distributor for CDs, because the joke was, 0 points in the Eurovision. That's what they knew about Norway, and you knew you had a long way to go. But as you say, people say now they know a lot about Norwegian music. It has changed, and part of that, I will say, it's the government had invested in it.
Do you know offhand what the export situation is with Norway now then? How much music do you export? What's the percentage of the music economy in Norway dependent on exported music?
We don't know. We just got government money again to do a thorough survey and what is the income streams, because anybody that's worked with music, it's very hard. We have money for rights money coming back, royalties coming back to Norway. The last 10 years has tripled. So that's an indicator that it's going the right way. But we want to do it thoroughly and find out how important, how much money is it. So we are not afraid of it. We think it will be a tool for us to go to the government and say, you should invest even more.
As always happens, we're now drawing near to the end of our session. I've got a few indications of people who want to make a comment and ask a question. I'm going to go to the gentleman in the red top.
Hi, my name's Dougie Sunis. I run a management company called No Half Measures. We've got some well-established artists, and we've been trying to develop a number of other artists. I put my hand up earlier on when we were getting slightly bogged down, as already been pointed out, in the venues, setting up venues in schools, etc., which is a decent idea. But you could have as many venues around the country as you want. Someone's still got to pay to be a promoter, to advertise, to do posters, flyers. Then you've got touring costs. You've got to get the band on the road, van hire, fuel, road crew, accommodation, subsistence, all the rest of it. It's these things, it's these funding things, that's on the live side of it. Recording music, marketing and promoting music, and the assets you need to do that, videos, photographs, hire of the expertise that was mentioned earlier, people to do radio, people to do TV, people to do press, showcasing, You know, you can do plenty of gigs in Scotland fairly cost effectively. You want to go to London to showcase to the, you know, to the bulk of the industry, that costs a lot of money. You want to go further afield to Japan or to the States or to Canada or to Norway even, that costs a lot of money. You know, my company's based in West Central Scotland, you know, and we do not see any support from the likes of Scottish Enterprise or the Scottish Government. Creative Scotland, the point was made earlier on, you know, some things they do get behind, but if you're not part of the club, you know, you can wait and you can wait and you can continue to wait. You know, the Highlands and Islands do seem to have their shit together. You know, there are funds available whereby, you know, you can access money to hire that expertise, to pay for those costs. You know, Scotland's a tiny country. You know, I get people chapping my door every day saying, will you manage us? Will you put our record out? Will you book us gigs? You know, and there's some incredible talent out there. I'm having to knock back that talent because it's me that spends my money, and I'm proud that I do spend my own money, but I've only got enough of it. I'm not going to turn around to my staff and say, by the way, you're not getting paid this week because we've decided to take this band on. You know, the point I'm making is there's a real gap there. Someday, you know, if the government want to play the cultural card and say we back music in Scotland, then they should back music in Scotland and back serious businesses in Scotland, and primarily that's with funding.
Okay, thanks very much for that contribution. A friend at the front, followed by the woman at the back.
The traditional way of making it a big time is performing locally, pubs, clubs, the big halls, getting noticed, then getting signed up. And that obviously still continues, but with cheaper music software and the internet, there's certainly plenty of cases of people in small villages in the Highlands putting something out on the internet, getting a following, and then getting noticed and signed up. Do you feel this may be the way a lot more is going, or is it still going to stay as a small percentage against the traditional way of making it good?
I'm going to put that to the panel before I move on, because we had some discussion about this in the green room before we came in. So would someone like to comment? Inga, are you want to comment on that? No? Olaf?
What was the question?
Do you feel that more people are going to make themselves known by going via the internet and YouTube, etc., and doing their own music on that, and then the music industry coming in and snapping them up, as opposed to the traditional way of the band or whatever playing the local pubs, clubs, getting their following, getting noticed, and then being picked up in the traditional way?
I'm interested that you split the two, because I would say that it goes hand in hand. You know, if you're playing a gig, then you might shoot one of the songs and stick that on YouTube and get attention. So I wouldn't see one as cancelling the other out. What I do see is different deals being done now. So in the past, you'd be signed by a label, and the label would own the recordings, and they would take care of all aspects of it. Now there's different models. People will record the music themselves and then license it to the label, and maybe the label just takes care of a couple of the aspects. So, but I think Scott's
what you're touching on is actually pretty important. I'm surprised we waited all the way to the end, because the idea of, with new technology, can you be in a small town and have global success? Can you be discovered out of Scotland? And actually, I think the answer is probably yes. I think that although things don't work in isolation, there are lots of factors. I actually think anyone can build an audience from wherever they are if they have something that's great. That's one of the problems of this leveling, is a lack of self-awareness from artists. They all think they're great, and they're not.
I think there is
Inga, we wanted to come in briefly.
General way of saying it's quite often now artists put out their first album themselves, and then maybe a couple of albums with a smaller label. But it takes longer if you think of the way of going to a major label. That they have normally done quite a few releases, but they get to that stage before major maybe pick them up from the start and develop them, sort of like over 3 albums. That it's not the way that normally it's happened now. It's a different route, but it's the same route in a way.
What's interesting as well is that now you can find if you're selling online, you can identify where your audience is. So, I mean, Scott's service is incredible for that. You can, get right down to postcodes where people are buying your music. And I mean, there was one really bizarre example of an Icelandic singer that did kind of strange, kind of burlesque stuff that sold thousands of downloads in South Korea for some reason. But I guess that meant she was big in South Korea, but she could go and play there or sell her records there. I mean, that's an extreme example, but I think there's more. It's more precise now in that respect.
And it's not just where. You can know more about the consumers. You can know more about what they're interested in, what they want. So some of the social networking stuff. I'm too old for social networking, but some of that social networking stuff is important for understanding who you're playing for. And I think the levelling down point is a good one. But I think bringing it back to the government again is that if you don't have a scene which is bubbling along, where there'll be a lot of mediocrity, there'll be a lot of people thinking they're great who aren't. And I'm afraid, sorry about it, there are going to be people in the room who think they're great who aren't. But if you don't have that level, you don't get the level above. And what worries me is that when you can't differentiate and you don't get the support for the kind of grassroots element in music, then you don't get to the stage of even trying it on the internet. But I do agree with you completely. I think that the model is completely open. And that's the opportunity, that everybody in the room that's creative can create stuff which they can get out there. What's difficult is proving that you're better than the next guy, because there's only so many pounds to go around in terms of what you buy.
We really don't have much time for many more contributions, and the woman at the back there has been waiting.
She's been waiting for ages as
and
well.
And girl at the front
yeah,
has also
I think longer
been
than
waiting.
anyone.
So I did indicate the woman at the back first, then I'll come to yourself, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to call it a day.
Yeah, just to compartmentalise my question. When I was in London, I had a band, and we were doing gigs, and not only a huge living, but managing to sort of make a living from doing a mixture of covers and originals, doing we do covers at functions, and we do sort of regular rock gigs where we would do original material and get paid for it. Since I've been in Scotland, I've not been able to find any venues that are willing to pay the artists a fee, and it's always been on some sort of ticket deal. As we're talking about the future of the music industry, do you see that becoming a kind of nationwide thing, applying to the London scene eventually, or is it still likely to be do you think it's still likely to be that disparity between bands getting paid up front in one city and then in another city not being paid at all, and just just playing for fun of it, really?
Anybody want to approach that, Caroline?
When you say about a ticket deal, I'm assuming you mean a kind of pay-to-play kind of deal or something like that. I don't think that's, well, I'd like to think it's not hugely out there. When Olaf mentioned earlier on that he has a hatred or a mild hatred for Battle of the Bands, I share that purely because they're normally done in some kind of really badly, organised ticket thing, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a battle, essentially. But I don't think that it's fair to say that that's only a existence up here in Scotland and not in London, because it exists in some venues or with some promoters, but the more bands refuse to work that way, the more hopefully these people will die off, I think, is the best way of putting it. Would you kind of...
Thanks, Caroline. I need to go to the young women because we really are just about out of time.
Okay, I'll make this as quick as possible.
Could you maybe speak to this one?
I'm Ashley O'Connor-Hanlon from the Aberdeen City Youth Council, and I'm also representing Scottish Youth Parliament. I was here for the Cultural Summit the other week, and one of the things of the discussion was that there's lack of funding into cultural things such as music, and the German delegate brought that governments aren't willing to fund cultural events as much as maybe other issues. From your point of view, do you think it's funded enough by governments?
Okay.
I think I'm quite old school. I find it, weird that we live in a society where no one questions the weapons industry being massively subsidized by the government, and getting taxpayers' money to make weapons, but people still question the idea of actually supporting culture, which has got an economic element to it, as well as the making you feel good.
Very, very finally, young woman at the back, please.
I'm Yi Dong, coming from China, based in London and Beijing, being an international soloist of a Chinese instrument and a cultural promoter. My question is, do you think the increasing role played by internet and the airport and this sort of high-tech technologies going with the music have a potential danger to marginalize more people who are not so highly skilled to be a potential member of the audience? And how should the promoters, administrators, founders, and the government to deal with this kind of a potential? Thank you.
Okay, Caroline?
I was just thinking when you were saying about people who are not as highly skilled. I thought that's a very lovely way of putting it. And it kind of touches on Scott's comment earlier about, technology can jump ahead in leaps and bounds, and it can be great, but people can hide behind it, and people can have false ideas of grandeur that they're fantastic, when in fact it's just a production suite is fantastic. And I think, unfortunately, that is one thing that goes badly. But we just hear, on my side, TV and film, we hear a lot of that, because obviously everything is done through production. We don't do live. We don't get to see bands live. It's unfortunately something I do less and less of in my job. So that's the only thing. Sorry, I just got a bit distracted because I thought that's a lovely way of putting it. How eloquent. So that, apologies. That doesn't really answer your question. I just got a bit caught up there.
Final word on the digital issues from the panel. Scott?
I'm not even sure what that question was again.
Well,
How are they
I think the
disadvantaged?
answer is that she's worried that people who aren't internet savvy are marginalised by not having access to the internet. I think is what you were saying.
But I think that goes away. I mean, I think that, you could say people didn't have radio or televisions and therefore they couldn't see things, but then they're in everyone's house. And people didn't have electricity or water, but now they're in everyone's house. And I think being connected and having connected devices is going to be at 100% penetration. I mean, look at mobile phones. Within 15 years, it went from single-digit penetration in this country to 100%.
Thanks. Olaf, are people still buying albums?
I still do. Scott ridicules me for it, but I've even bought some vinyl recently because I think we'll still have vinyl when the CD has died. But it looks nice, and you get a download code and you can stick it on your iPod, which he's been teasing me about as well. But I tried to use a streaming service yesterday because I'd forgotten my iPod and the server was down, so I had no music. So I still want to possess something.
Oh well, I'll be dusting off my vinyl and bringing it down from the attic then before long. Inge, last word?
Just in Norway, the income from digital and streaming and digital is taken over physical a long time ago. And I think the penetration of streaming is really high. You can't stop it. You have to join it.
Even in the UK, now digital income has overtaken physical income for the music industry. It's not going backwards. We're going forward.
Thanks very much. I'm really going to have to stop there. I think we've had an excellent discussion on the future of the music industry and indeed the whole of the music industry, perhaps, we've covered. I can't believe that our time is up, but sadly we're over time. So I would like you to just join with me to thank our panel who are Scott Cohen, Scott Hutchison, Caroline Gorman, Olaf Furnish, Inger Durdle and John Preston. They've been an excellent panel tonight and we appreciate very much them coming. Thank you. And thank you to the audience for participating in the Festival of Politics.